So hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today we have Scott here, and he has his own YouTube channel, and he's also involved in basically counseling work. And Scott, would you like to briefly introduce your channel?
Yeah, my channel name is Scott Morgan, and I make videos on personal growth, mostly around personality types, and more specifically the INFJ personality type.
Yeah, so today we are going to be covering mental health tips for the INFJ, and it would mostly be in the area of relationships and the workplace. And just a small announcement for my own channel, I have rolled out new personality themed merchandise that has been designed by my own INFJ friend. And the designs are going to be really different this time, that are professionally done by a graphic designer. So you can check out the merchandise below. And with that, we can start our topic of the day, which is on the mental health struggles of an INFJ. So I would like to start by asking you, what do you think are some of the main INFJ mental health struggles that you have come across, and how does it relate to our cognitive functions?
Sure. So I think it's probably fair to say, just off the top, that INFJs struggle like anybody else struggles in regards to mental health. But generally, when we're dealing with mental health, often the roots are found in childhood.
Right.
And yeah, and I think drilling into that a little more, I think one of the main challenges for INFJs is the lack of mirroring that they receive from those around them growing up. That
Yes, definitely.
yeah, that's where I'd start.
Right. So like the lack of other INFJs sort of being around them and
Yeah.
able to see how they look to others, and like having their values and beliefs mirrored back.
Yeah, yeah. The way I've mentioned it in some of my videos, it's like a way of saying it is like a bandwidth, that the INFJ operates on a certain bandwidth, and others, for the most part, operate in a different kind of a bandwidth. And there's only a slight overlap. And so the INFJ is speaking from their frequency or from their bandwidth from an early age, just naturally being themselves. And everyone, of course, are trying to naturally be themselves, but often for those around the INFJ, what's being mirrored back is just a fragment of what is actually going on for the INFJ. So because NI is introverted and it's fairly unknown in the culture, it's just not seen to be reflected. So in a more healthier setting, it's probably just that it's not noticed or understood. Whereas maybe in a more dysfunctional environment, it's not just not seen, but what is being seen could be ridiculed, or there could be certain kinds of behaviors coming back to the INFJ because the child's different. And so that sort of can make the child a bit of the black sheep in the family, or even a bit of a target.
Right. And I think that speaking from my own experience, a lot of people assume that the INFJ or NI dominant personalities are common because they a lot online. But I would say that from my own personal experience in real life, it's not. And especially people leading with introverted intuition in general, including INTJs, I know only a handful throughout my life. And that's, to me, I'm already sort of sometimes in the environment where I can potentially meet an intuitive, and still I don't see them very often. So I do know more ENFPs than INFJs in the intuitive environments, and also sometimes INFPs. But speaking of NI DOMs, I really don't get to know a lot of them. And this has been my experience pretty consistently, even
Yeah.
in different countries. So I would say
Mm.
it's fair to say that leading with introverted intuition is not common. And
Yep.
I think there's also a lot of mistyping going on, definitely, like
Mm.
feeling types, they might identify with the descriptions of the empathy and all that, but
Sure.
introverted intuition itself, it's a very different cognitive function than most people in societies are able to recognize. That's my
For
own
sure.
experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think I only knew of an INTJ. My first experience wasn't with an INFJ, it was with an INTJ. And I just felt like there was something very similar about our thinking patterns
Mm.
back when I didn't know about MBTI. And
Right.
and that was like I was already 15, 16 at the time. So before that, I really did not know anyone who's an NI dominant. Yeah. So that's
Right.
like the experience, I think.
Mm.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's like really true what you said about the mirroring. But
Mm.
I do
Mm.
think that's very helpful when we have any sort of mirroring, either from like TV shows or some kind of representation, and it can
Mm.
really help us to clear up a lot of what we think about, because it's someone else is also having that, so it makes it okay.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so I'd like to know, in terms of the general struggles for an INFJ,
Mm.
um, do you think there can be ways, for example, for the child, especially when they are very young, to be able to deal with that, because they may not be as resourceful as an
Mm.
adult, for example?
Mm. So, how does a child? How can a child cope with these differences?
Yeah.
With this sort of okay. Uh, I think the challenge with that is often a child is the challenge is that they're not resourced. Their resources are what are provided to them in the environment. So
Or maybe when
yeah, I'm
they are
not
a
quite
little
sure.
older, when they are in school, maybe.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think for the most part, children, young people, they're really just products of their environment, and it's sort of just luck if they come across another INFJ or another intuitive, or they might get a really good teacher that helps um, with helping them form their identity, or they very much could come from a family where they're valued for that difference, even if the parents or the caregivers aren't even aware of what that difference is. They still bring value to the child. I think one of the main ways I think young people are figuring things out, and I like to think that people are finding out their INFJs earlier and earlier in these days. I found out about the INFJ piece when I was in my early 30s, and so I had to sort of do a whole lot of reflecting from that point back, and sort of look at relationships and so on. And I think it's I might be going on a tangent, but the key people that tended to be in my life, in hindsight, were intuitives, um, and um, one friend I had in college, we actually met talking in a counselling subject. I can't remember what it was, but we had to sort of pair up, and um, my friend gave me a metaphor about the Titanic, and just regarding his own life and story. And that's interesting that the Titanic story brought us together as friends. We've been friends ever since. So it's been about 15 years, and it turned out he was an INFJ. And so um, I think when when two INFJs sort of find themselves in a similar environment, they can tend to find each other. It's just usually in any group, there's probably 0 to maybe 1 INFJ. So, but I think people are searching more and more online for answers, and it's interesting that people, even on my channel, they'll just say, "What? Like I've stumbled on this INFJ thing on your channel, and it's resonating with me." And so, I think online's a main way that INFJs figure out a lot about who they are. And as I've said before, I think in other interviews, the Myers-Briggs and its definitions and people's videos and conversations really are a form of reparenting for the INFJ to gather the missing pieces of their identity that wasn't reflected in childhood, ends up being reflected later on in life.
Yeah, yeah. And also speaking from my own experience, and I would say that I would recommend that the INFJ child or younger INFJ really go for what they're interested in, regardless of what other people around them are interested in, because that is really the main way they can find people who are similar to who they are, because likely your strengths are going to be very different from people around you most of the time. Like, for example, I remember, it's a very stereotypical INFJ thing, but I remember I was reading a lot more than a lot of my peers, because I was just more interested in those things. And as a result of that, I actually was able to bond with some of the NTJ teachers in the school, and also some NT types of students who happen to have the same interests. So I think it might be really challenging if you come from a home, especially that may not have that interest, or a society that is not that intuitive or intuitive recognizing. And I did mention that, and I think in Asia, especially in certain parts of Asia, that's the intuitives are not that transparent. But you still have to sort of go for what you like very firmly, because that's where you get the best sort of the best selection of people. Like go for the subject you like, and go for the causes that you enjoy. And that's where I really found the most, and not go for like things that you're really bad at and you don't like, just because other people are sort of going for that, because that's not your strength and not your purpose, I guess. So yeah, that requires a lot of like confidence. I mean, it requires a lot of belief in yourself, to go for something different.
Yeah, I remember. I think I would have been maybe 16 or 17, and an ENTJ friend of mine was interested in military things, and we had this. He had this idea of joining the military, and of course, I didn't know who I was, and so I kind of tagged along, and it was my ENTJ friend, myself, and another friend. And went to the sort of like the intake day, sort of find out about it, and then went back to do a test. And I was probably about 10 minutes into doing that test, and I just sort of saw the light, and I thought, "What am I doing here?" And so I just stood up and left halfway through the test, because I just realized this is not for me. And so just the funny areas, or the things that happen when we're searching. I know I wasn't even consciously searching for who I was. I was probably just naturally, just following along with life, and just the places you can end up. And I'm glad I didn't end up in the military.
Yeah, that would be a very different path.
Yes.
Yeah. I think people, especially INFJs with FE, it's a little risky because we don't have the very strong FI that's, you know, NFPs have. And so sometimes we take a little bit of a detour. We might, if our society or people around us have very different ideas about what we should go for. So that's something to be cautious about. Yeah.
Well, my
So
mum
another
used to always
question.
complain why. Oh, sorry.
Right. No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, my mum growing up would always complain why I wasn't outside. Get
Yeah.
out there, go and do stuff outside. But I was sort of just inside dreaming and doing my own thing. And that was something that I believe my mum's ISF, ISTP, and so she couldn't understand why I wasn't outside in the doing of the sensory environment. But it all
Right.
makes sense now.
Yeah. And sometimes if you grow up with another thing that I see in like really common happening is INFJs who grow up with ESFJ or ESTJ parents, they tend to push the very SJ hobbies on them. Like
Right.
why you're not enthusiastic about like cleaning your house, like cooking,
Right.
you know. They want you to be like really very passionate about those things. But I don't
Right.
think it's natural for us to be very passionate about um those things. I mean, I can do it sometimes, but it's not like my main passion in life. And they find it to be like, oh, isn't it natural for people to want to do that? The
My
SJ,
brother is ESFJ, and growing up, I found that I was very much influenced by his interests and hobbies. And so he found skateboarding, and then he just had a way. I think it's that strong FE, just that sort of really strong influential FE to sort of say you'll love this too. It's so amazing, and so I end up with a skateboard, and I was a very ordinary skateboarder. So so all of these things, though, I think just for all of us growing up, we try out all of these different things, and we end up sort of finding our groove. We end up finding our path somehow, mainly through, or not maybe mainly, but in a lot of cases through the mistakes we make, and not so much mistakes, but just trying things and it not really fitting, or it doesn't really work, and it sort of narrows our focus towards ourselves at some point.
yeah. And I do see that sometimes INFJs can enjoy some SE hobbies, but it has to be sort of moderate,
Sure.
not too extreme, because we do have it. It's just a little, you know, at the back. So yeah, I do enjoy some SE hobbies more than the SI stuff, I think, but it's also like in moderation.
Yeah.
So I guess we can go into more specifics of the issues that INFJs commonly face. So one area would be in the family, which I think you also briefly mentioned about the family structure and being perceived as different. So perhaps we can highlight some of the issues faced in the family.
So I've mentioned that basically it's easy for an INFJ's reality to either not be seen or ignored, misunderstood. I think another aspect is I think NI can act like a blank screen.
Right.
And so people can unconsciously project onto that blank screen.
Yes.
What's in them. And so again, if it's a healthy family environment, that's a lot less likely. But in a more dysfunctional environment, there's that dysfunction's got to go somewhere, and for relief for the person that's carrying it. And usually it's the innocent child that can be projected onto the various issues in the caregiver or even a sibling. And so that can be a big challenge. And I think what that can do is lead to a disconnection with the self. So, and obviously the child doesn't know they're an INFJ. They're usually growing up. It's usually something that comes later. So, just bear with me. So, yeah. So again, the lack of mirroring can lead to the INFJ not getting to know themselves. That's where I was trying to go. Not getting to know themselves through that mirroring, so they don't. So they lose sight of who they are, and I think to some extent they lose connection with their NI. I think it's operating in the background. I don't think it's ever fully lost, or and I think the INFJs using it most of the time, but they don't know they are. Like there's not much of an awareness. Like they know they're different, but they don't know maybe why they're different. And so there can be a problem with relationship with self, which I think is ultimately the biggest problem in adulthood, is relationship with self. And
Yes.
and that in childhood can lead to a lot of problems in relationships in adulthood. One-sided relationships, codependent relationships, being taken advantage of, and we might go into it a little more. But I think one of the things that can happen for an INFJ is they rely more on their FE, because that's the piece that is mirrored back, or it becomes a bit of a defense mechanism, or operates in that way anyway, because the NI is it's like they're getting hurt in their NI but don't know it. And so the FE steps out in front to try to cope with that, and whether that's people pleasing or being more bubblier than maybe they normally would be, these sorts of things to sort of compensate for that imbalance. And that can lead to, in some cases, that could just lead to burnout, exhaustion, because there's this energy going into FE in a defensive way to try and buffer what's coming at them from the outer world. So it could lead to depression, anxiety, those sorts of things.
Yeah. Can you give an example of how the projection might happen? Because this is something that I find interesting, and I've watched a few videos on that, but perhaps you can make it like specific. Yeah.
So what it could look like is, let's say a parent, and this could happen to any child, but a common one might be a parent with their own unresolved childhood issues, and maybe they had abuse in their own childhood, or it could have just been like their father was really serious, and so they developed a very serious way of being, and that made them uncomfortable when someone's happy, because it's reflecting to them that they've, the thing in them that they're not comfortable with. And so the child is naturally being happy, and it upsets the parent because they're aware in themselves that, that they're not aware in themselves that part of them is suppressed, and they're uncomfortable with joy, and so they can project that seriousness and that, and sort of chastise the child to try and make the child serious, and shut down their more joyful side. So something like that.
Yeah, and I think especially when parents are not aware and they try to want the child to be like them, I think that's where there's a main issue, because It's very rare to have an INFJ parent. It can happen, but not very common. And if the parent is very different from our personality type, then and they want us to be like them, that's not really technically possible. To be like a same personality. Yeah. And what about right. So what about I think in extension, which you also sort of mentioned earlier, in relationships, I think that can touch on friendships as well, what are some of the common issues
in friendships
as well as other types of relationships?
I think what the main way that could that there could be problems is the INFJ doesn't know who they are. A bit like myself, when I was 16, I didn't quite know who I was. My friend had already figured out that he was into the military and those sorts of things.
The ENTJ guy.
Yes, and I didn't really know who I was, so I was partly a bit of a tag along kind of person in some respects. Something's happening over there, and I'll just go along sort of for the ride, sort of thing. So there could be the INFJ is not fulfilling them their goals, or they may not even have formulated goals or direction in their life, and so influenced by the friendships that they have, and that could lead to some positive things. There could be some good people in the INFJ's life that introduces them to some things that turn out to be really good, or there could be some people that aren't so healthy and introduce negative things, and that could lead to issues and problems for them. So I'd say that would be a common one.
Yeah, I think it's very important for the INFJ to note that when they are not playing the main character, I like to use this analogy because it's a very like typical film reference or story reference, novel reference. And I think we know when we are not playing the main character, it feels very side character-ish when we are sort of making the decision for other people, or we are going for what they like. Sort of, because that's what they want to do. I mean, it can happen in friendships. It can also happen like, among peers, maybe, I don't know, teamwork setting or whatever. Like you sort of just go along. I think it's very obvious. It's a very obvious feeling to you, and it's something that we have to sort of be aware when it happens, because there are actually a lot of opportunities where we can in fact be the so-called main character, but I think it's sort of like passing up that opportunity to other person, and especially with the FE focus, and we have to sort of remind ourselves that we are the main character, but like like the playing the main character, it changes the dynamic a little bit, and it actually makes it more balanced. I think the friendship becomes more balanced, and you can also sort of have a good time when the friend is also introduced to what you like. It's not so one-sided.
Yeah, absolutely.
What about in the workplace? I think this is something that a lot of INFJs also face issues. And when I see the videos online about workplace issues, it seems to be pretty common. Like there's a lot of trends and patterns that I see. So what would you say in your practice as well as your own experience, some of the workplace challenges?
I think you sort of touched on it just before. I'm just trying to get back to it. That whole idea of the main character.
Right.
I think because the FE and the desire for cooperation and harmony, I think that moves the INFJ away from being the main character, because their goal is more for a sort of egalitarian kind of atmosphere where everyone is equal and supported and all of that. And that is certainly not the way of Western culture, or it's more around that idea, like Susan Cain's book about the culture of personality and the culture of character. In that, I think the INFJ is trying to operate in a culture of character, where everybody else, well, most people are operating on the culture of personality, and see that trait in the INFJ as weakness and maybe even naivety. And so, and the INFJ, for the most part, is not interested in politics, like workplace politics and games and trying to squash somebody else to get ahead and all of these. Whereas others, not everybody, of course, but there's usually going to be one or a few in a workplace that do operate more strategically or more tactically. And so that puts the INFJ at a disadvantage. So I think part of a growth step for INFJs is recognizing, firstly, honoring the strength of that harmony mindset, and being cooperative and that sort of thing. That's not a bad thing. So it's like, don't reject it, but recognize that in certain situations or in certain environments, it's not helpful.
Yeah.
And where a more assertive, direct approach is required, and that there's a whole journey in that, I think, because the INFJ needs to figure out what it is they do want, and often I think INFJs can find themselves in careers they're not actually interested in. They've been guided and led in a particular direction. So they don't have they may not have a passion or a drive in that career path or in that workplace, and so they're kind of stuck, and they're sort of subjected to those that have found their path and are willing to sort of go to any lengths to get ahead in it. And so so that can certainly be a challenge. I think the sooner an INFJ can get on their path, I think more consciously than just sort of by chance. And like I was saying before, like, yep, I'm not for military. I'm glad I didn't sign up. I'm glad I didn't become a lumberjack or something like that. I'm sort of being more intentional about direction and purpose. Sort of a lot of energy can be saved. So that's certainly a challenge. I think the other concept is where an INFJ, like anybody, can find themselves unconsciously recreating their family of origin in the workplace. And so they project stuff onto others and kind of create a similar environment. And that can be tricky and something to be mindful of, and find ways of addressing that. And I think another issue INFJs can have is I think INFJs can have a particularly hard time working underneath poor leadership. I think they're very in tune with the fact that it's not working, or they shouldn't be the leader, or there's certain traits that really the INFJ feels way more than maybe others. Others might notice it, but they find strategies and tactics to address those things, other colleagues, whereas the INFJ is like, this is getting in the way of cooperation and harmony, and yet they're in leadership, so what can I do about changing that? I can't. And so it's like a thing that grates on the INFJ probably for the period of time they're under that leadership. So I think half the battle is knowing some of the challenges, because again, depending on the INFJ's journey, they could be having these problems, but not really being able to even articulate what it might be because of that lack of mirroring. That they're having these relationship problems, but they can't figure out why they're having them. So I guess I'm a believer that that life kind of leads us to where we need to go for the most part, and so like because some of these problems can feel like the INFJ stuck forever, but life changes, things happen, and there's a season for everything. And I think ultimately we either find a way of overcoming these challenges, or finding a way through them in some way. But again, I think it's becoming more consciously aware of them that empowers us to change, and that usually equates directly with self-awareness and self-knowledge.
Yes, definitely, because it's like the more you sort of know yourself and you are firm about what you want, the less you are just tagging along, because the tagging along feeling that really doesn't feel good because you're just being swept along by other people, what they want, and what and you're not really enjoying the process because it's not what you yourself value.
Yes.
It's sort of like the current is just taking you away, bobbing along the ocean, and it's so different when you actually consciously do things, not just do it for the salary or do it to make people happy for a while. So I'm curious to know your own, maybe your own story about how you manage to find work that resonates with you.
Yeah. My first main job was working at a supermarket.
Wow, that's very different.
I was there for a couple of years, and so I started there part-time, then I went full-time. Like, I just wasn't doing much at school, so I just worked full-time. So, when I was 18, 19, just through a friend that I knew, his mum worked at a bank in town, and so there was some jobs going, and so I applied. I certainly didn't belong in that culture, dishonoring checks and for 8 hours a day. I think when I look back, that was probably the beginning of me realizing, probably realizing in hindsight, but that certain workplace cultures I just don't fit in.
Yes.
So I was there for a few years. Then my path really began when I was unemployed, and so this would have been early 20s, I think, and I had to do I think it was like a class to learn how to look for work. You were sort of put there to do it. After a certain amount of time, if you hadn't found work, you had to do one of these things. And it was a bit embarrassing to admit in a way, but it was actually the beginning, because the lady that was running it mentioned aged care, of all things. And there was just something about it. I didn't know anything about aged care. She must have just mentioned helping the elderly. And of course, it spoke to that helping part of me that I didn't really know was there. And I thought, I think I'm going to look into that. I had a job the next day, working in an aged care facility. And that's, I think, where I began to develop without my knowing it, develop my NI and my FE. I was able to build really good rapport with the residents. Each resident required a different approach and a different, and you sort of learn how to work with them and so on. So I did that for a few years, but the conditions aren't great. So I left that job partly because they started bringing in the mentally ill for some reason into that same facility. So it was a mixture of aged care and people with mental health issues. It was a very odd combination, and the elderly were uncomfortable, and so my time was up there, and I left. But then I just progressed in that, and I moved from one state to the next. I did a lot of moving, actually. I was in New Zealand. I moved to Queensland, and I moved down to Melbourne in these jobs, and I worked in more like one-on-one care with people with disabilities, and that sort of helped to develop my my skill set even further. Again, not consciously, but I just had a knack for helping this particular resident to really grow from their brain injury after a car accident. Where they were doing maybe 10% of the morning tasks on their own, to by the time I'd finished working with them, they were doing about 90%. And they would have like a case meeting with all the different people involved in the resident's situation. And I was speaking to a neuropsychologist, and he looked at me and he said, Scott, the things that you're, I can't remember exactly how he said it, but it was like the things that you're achieving with this resident is way outside of the norm. And he spoke it in a different kind of way. It spoke right into me, where I was like, okay, so I've got a gift here, or I've got some abilities that I didn't really know I had, and he encouraged me, and that led to I'm just trying to think now the series of events, but the next part of the story, I guess, was I was getting counselling for myself by this stage, so early 20s. I'm like, something's not right here. Things, it's not like I'm not trying to improve, but things don't seem to be improving in some respects anyway. So I'm gonna go and talk to somebody. And a couple of years later, maybe. So I was working back in aged care by this stage, and I thought, well, I want to improve. I want to develop. I was starting to get my life together and work on some things and progress. And I thought, well, I want to progress. So what I'll do is I'll become a nurse. It's the logical next step within being a personal care attendant to go and do nursing and improve in that way. But I didn't want to do that. But it was the logical, easiest decision.
Mm-hmm.
It was actually my counsellor who said, well, because I was telling him this, and he said, well, what do you want to do? And I just needed someone to ask me the question. Like, just having someone external ask me it, it just did something. And I just said, without even knowing I was going to say it almost, I said, I think I'd make a good counsellor. And he said, I think you would as well. But I've been waiting for you to figure that out, which I thought was very wise of him. And so that was the beginning of that journey. And then when I look back on the aged care and the disability support work, it was all building towards becoming a counsellor. This is a long answer to your question. So yeah, that eventually led to going and doing a degree in counselling, and then becoming a counsellor. And yeah, the rest is history, I suppose. And then I found out years later that I was an INFJ, and they're the counsellor and all of that kind of stuff, which I felt was like just a further confirmation that I was on the right track. That I discovered INFJ later on. Yeah.
Yes, I'm a huge believer in the concept of ikigai, which is a Japanese concept. I don't know if you've heard of it. You probably
I don't think so.
Oh, okay. It's basically, I mean, it's quite idealistic for most people to hear about it, but I do believe in it, because it's basically about how you match your job to what you want. So yes. It's like what the world needs, what you can offer, and and what you're good at. I think that's the three. And it has to overlap
Oh
eventually.
yes, I have seen this recently. The circles within circles. That yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, and obviously the concept was set in Japan, where ironically most people are not finding that. That's why they came up with it, I believe, because they realized that,
Right.
a lot of people are not happy because they're not following that. And a
Mm,
lot of it has to do with our intuition, where I think following intuition and following what is easier on the outside, that can be a little bit of a struggle. Like sometimes
mm,
we want to go for something that looks easier,
right.
like a natural progress to the next stage, but it may not be what we want. And
Yeah.
I just thought that I think it's like a way of me trying to tell other INFJs and also other personality types that have this issue,
Mm,
that it's okay to try to find out for yourself, and it's a process. And I think
mm,
especially with another personality type that I know has this issue is ISFPs, because they also don't really work well with the traditional TE structure, since that's not
right.
what is wrong for them. And I think both of
Mm,
us, it's interesting because a lot of jobs have a lot of TE components,
mm,
especially when you're looking at the structured jobs like banking and finance and all that.
right. Right.
And INFJs have to be very careful because, from my own observation, I don't think we work very well with TE structures.
Burnout
Um,
material.
yeah, and it's very comfortable and great for the EXTJs especially, but it's really not the right environment for us. And
Mm,
I think we have to be okay with the process of finding, of searching, because it's a different process for us. And I think,
yes.
like, sort of constantly trying to move towards the ikigai. Um, and I know other INFJs, mostly through online actually, who are also
Mm,
doing that for themselves. And one
right.
of them is actually a professional YouTuber now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and he talked about his process online, about how he used to be wanting to be a film director, and then he became like a freelance
Mm,
film editor, and then he became a game YouTuber, and now he became a
right.
different kind of YouTuber, where he realized that's where he is most comfortable in. So
Yes.
yeah, so it's like being okay with that process of discovery.
Mm,
Yeah.
for sure. For sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, because I don't think INFJs just are the type who can easily be like immediately in a structured place and they just stay there forever.
Mm.
That's more of an STJ thing, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I worked in an office for I think about 6 or 7 years while I studied and was getting the practice up and running, and I felt like I was there about 4 years too long. But
Yeah.
it's just some of the things you have to do, to achieve the greater goal.
Right.
But um, I think along the lines of that technique that you're talking about, is with an INFJ, or for anybody figuring out where they should, what their career path or their purpose is look back on not just the work they've done, but their interests, their hobbies, um, you know, their, their education, as well as their work history, and sort of bring all of that together and look at that, and through that lens look at where they could go from here, as opposed to just looking at what's, like in my case, what's the next step on the road that I'm on.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not really interested in that. I'm not passionate about it, but I want to do something. Is gathering more information in, and that can sometimes speak to a direction that's not as obvious. Um,
Yeah.
because it could be the hobby that could turn into a career.
Right.
or just something that they're interested in that they haven't pursued yet. And so that can be a way forward as well.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say, like, I think certain office structures can work for INFJs,
Right.
but typically, from my observation, it tends to be more of the humanities type of
Yes.
office. So, for example, like maybe journalism,
Mm.
something to do with writing would potentially be a better fit than a finance job, for example, because I
Agreed.
really have not seen any INFJs enjoy the very TJ structure for long
Right.
anyway. So I think it's
Yes.
very important to really know what kind of culture you tend to do well
Mm.
in, because those types of people are going to be around you quite often. So
Yes.
the
Yes.
cultural fit is very important as well, because they would
Yeah.
also want someone who is their cultural fit, and you want to, it has to
Right.
be like a mutual thing coming
Yes.
together.
Yeah. For sure.
Yeah. Lastly, I want to sort of touch on that one point that you mentioned earlier about, how some INFJs might fall into the trap of accidentally recreating their childhood stuff into, adult
Mm.
relationships or even workplace
Mm.
situations. So how does that happen? Because I'm also very like curious to know more about these dynamics, which I have seen play out, I think, pretty
Mm.
often, and how can they, prevent that from happening?
Mm. Mm. I think it ties into, I think it's the imago therapy or theory, where we're attracted to, we build an, an imprint of our positive and negative traits of our caregivers, certain attributes and characters. Some of them,
Mhm.
yeah, some of them positive and that sort of thing, and then some of them negative that could also be have like an unresolved issue attached to it, just due to the impact that that negative trait had on the person, and then it gets internalized, and then the person goes into a workplace and uh, some aspect of that person over there will match some of the unconscious the characteristic that's unconscious, let's say in the INFJ for the sake of this talk, um, and think they see it in that person over there when it might not actually be the case, or it might be that everyone has the potential to have that trait, whether it's positive or negative. But the INFJ might see a glimpse of it and expand that as a projection onto them,
Mm.
and they will probably, the other person will probably have something going on in them that is sort of vice versa. So that whatever the INFJ is doing in that projection could become could be the like the fuel that drives that other person to react from their imago map, to use that phrase. So the INFJ might be eliciting
Mhm.
a behavior that triggers the other person, and that behavior might be the very thing of the
Mhm.
projecting. That's making sense. And so then they get locked into a dynamic. Um,
Yeah.
so so maybe someone grows up with a dominant mum, and they hated that. They hated the dominance, and so
Mm.
that might be more of a conscious sort of hate, if you like, or just
Mhm.
liked the dominance, um, and then find someone in the workplace that mirrors that dominance and then react to that dominance, causing them to react back, and then they get locked in. So that could be the way it sort of gets set up. A way of dismantling it could be just talking about it head on, which is more being assertive and direct, as opposed to um, the harmony piece. The INFJ might actually unconsciously find themselves trying to please the person that they now sense doesn't like them because of the projection that they've put on them. So then the INFJ is caught trying to work with someone with this kind of dynamic going on. And the key again is that awareness to recognize, hang on, there's something going on, and it could be helpful. It might not be, but it could be helpful to just talk about it with the person. Saying, are you noticing you've got the tension that's going on here, and whether it's the INFJ explaining their experience or just checking in with the other to try to bring some awareness to the dynamic. That could be helpful. It might also not be helpful. The other person might deny everything and gaslight the INFJ, making it worse. So um, I'd say that's a main way of addressing it. Some of it could be just being aware of, there is this person I'm having a hard time working with, and working on the self to not react. So not be the one fueling the dynamic, learning to not react and do those things, which kind of can, like if the dynamics like this, if the INFJ is not doing their thing back, it loses energy and momentum. And that could kind of, it's like a I don't know, like a tornado that sort of loses its energy, and then it sort of just dissipates, and the relationship could mature through there.
Yes, I have a very fun story. I'm not going to tell the whole story, but
right.
I'm going to tell the good side of that, because recently I was aware of what I was doing in my past situation where the same thing that you talked about happened.
Right.
Exactly the same thing. So
right.
I was definitely very triggered by dominance in the workplace, especially since I traditionally do not work well with ENFJs, and I have since avoided, like, not really avoided, I have gravitated towards the non-EXTJ dominated field, which suits me more anyway, naturally.
Yeah.
So I'm working very well with, like, other personality types now. But recently I came to a point where I had to deal with an EXTJ again. And it was for a short period of time for my freelance work. And I sort of applied the techniques that I learned in order to prevent a reaction, because I knew that if I were to react, like you said, it would cause the tornado to sort of go out of hand.
Supercharge it.
Yeah, so I was like really conscious about what was going on, because I knew that person was doing the EXTJ thing again.
Right.
And basically it was we were on set for a shoot, and there was this person who was just really strict and sort of shouting at people, which it's common during a shoot sometimes, because it's a very, like, fast-paced environment. So I kept telling myself, because the whole team was friendly, she was the only one who was, having that dominance personality. So I remember I kept telling myself, this is not personal. This person, that's just how she is. She's that way to everyone. She's not attacking you in any way. Sort of like neutralizing the threat, And I kept telling myself, she's probably having a hard day. This is a very difficult job, and she's stressed. I should make things easier for her. Just like keep telling myself to neutralize that tension. And I think it sort of went down. Like it was okay. Like she like scolded a few people, including me. And I just kept telling myself, like, oh, it's not personal. That's just how she is. It's a stressful job. She's having a hard day. Life is not easy for her. And I just, and it just went down. I didn't have any reaction, and she focused on something else. So yeah. So the next time I saw her, nothing happened. Like it was just, and I actually found some humor, because she was like that towards everyone. So it was like she would, like, after every scene, she would sort of like rush into the room and sort of check in on everyone and be like whether we are on the right behavior. And even some of the actors were like sort of laughing about it. They were like, oh, this person's sort of remind them of police officer or something.
Yes.
You're like laughing about it. So I'm like, yeah, that's actually the right reaction.
Yep.
Being like seeing humor and reminding yourself constantly that it's just a job,
Mm-hmm.
and not personal, nothing personal.
Yeah. Right. You bring up a point that's in there is focusing. Well, it's easy for us to focus on what a person does, but we don't always know why.
Mm-hmm.
And when we focus on what they're doing, it's very easy for us to get judgy towards it, and react. Have a part of us that reacts to that, fueling a dynamic. Whereas if we move away from what the other's doing and hypothesize, in a sense, the why. We might not know what the why is, but the why is a good like a de-escalator.
Mm-hmm.
Saying, oh, maybe they've just had a massive conflict with their spouse just before they came to work, and they've got lots of stuff going on in their personal life, and they're just barely holding it together. Like, just creating that can kind of help to bring some compassion and some understanding to it, as opposed to judgment and reaction.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a good thing, like a good principle to adopt, is that focusing on being curious about the why as opposed to reacting to the what.
Yeah. And that can sort of like help with the the dissolving of the childhood problem.
Exactly.
Because you're not playing into it.
Yes.
And also
Yeah.
being aware, like you said, about what kind of childhood problem that you commonly react to. I think that's
Right.
because it's unique for everyone. Like,
Yeah.
maybe for me it's like that problem, but with other people that could be other
For sure.
types of behaviors that trigger them more than others.
Yeah.
So yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. So thank you, Scott, for tuning in to this really insightful episode. And I hope that
Sure.
INFJs have gathered a lot of useful information for their workplace conflicts or relationships, and fostering a sense of belonging. And if you like this video, remember to like and subscribe. I've also linked Scott's channel down in the description box below, so you can check that out as well. We will see you next time. Bye.
Bye-bye.